Yeah, so I should start off with saying, thanking. So the park does have a nonprofit organization that supports the work that we do, a lot of the outreach and education, and that is Pacific Historic Parks. They actually support three other national parks here in the islands in the Pacific and also Diamond Head State Park as well. So it is through their support that we're able to offer these virtual speaker series. And so you heard Weston, he is behind the scenes helping to make sure that everything runs smoothly and helping to also field any questions that might come up during the presentation as well. But we'll definitely make sure to leave some time at the end so folks can ask some questions that they might want. So I'm just going to start with a little bit of maybe history for folks who may be new to Honouliuli. I'm starting out with our 10th anniversary this year since President Obama did establish us back in 2015 as a national park. And I'll share more a little bit about that at the end too, about what we have going on throughout the whole year this year to commemorate our 10 years. So with that, um, people might just have a basic question of where is Honouliuli. So those of you from Oahu, we are on the island of Oahu, on the main Hawaiian Islands, and we are on the west side of Oahu. So here's Honouliuli, and the other national park on the island is actually Pearl Harbor National Memorial. And I think it's really nice that both parks, the only two national parks in Oahu, are Pearl Harbor and Honouliuli, because I think they really complement each other with what the impacts were for December 7th when the Japanese Army attacked Pearl Harbor. And I'll get into a little bit of that a little bit later too. So that's kind of where we are. And I also do want to recognize that actually Honouliuli is the name of the ahupua'a that the park is situated in. It's actually part of the Ewamoku, and it is the largest ahupua'a on the island. And I always like to share that UH West Oahu did this beautiful mural on their campus that really goes into the mo'olelo of the ahupua'a. And we actually have a link on the park's website that has the 1 hour interview with the artist who made this beautiful mural on their campus. And so I definitely encourage you, if you want to learn more about the ahupua'a and its ties to Native Hawaiian culture, to definitely check that out. One thing I'll point out in this beautiful mural is the Willy Willy and the Pu'eo. And the reason why I point that out is because it's really neat that though this park was established for the incarceration site and the camp, we also do have natural resource management responsibilities. And we do have our endemic Willy Willy tree, which is a rare lowland dry forest. And this is actually the picture of the tree right here at the park. And this is kind of what it looks like in bloom. And you can see how beautiful the flowers are. And the pu'eo as well is a native endemic bird. It's the only native owl that we have in the islands. And so as part of the 10th, we are dedicating the month of May to learn about the natural resources at the park. And we do have two featured speakers that will be talking about the pu'eo and the Willy Willy as well. And I think what's really neat about the pu'eo is both have really deep Native Hawaiian cultural significance. Like the Willy Willy was used for canoe making, for medicinal purposes. But I think what's really neat about the pu'eo, in line with kind of the history of the Japanese American incarceration and World War II, was it's actually considered in Native Hawaiian culture a protector and a guide, a helper during war times. It's supposed to bring comfort and safeguard individuals. So I really think it's neat that we have the pu'eo in the area and can learn more about it, the owl, again in May. So with that, I want to share a little bit about how the camp came to be. And so this shares a little bit of that history, and it does go back way before December 7th. And it really harkens back to the sugar plantation days of Hawaii, where a lot of immigrants were brought over from countries like Japan, Okinawa, Korea, the Philippines. And during the sugar plantation days, it really was a system of labor that was almost like indentured servitude, where they really were controlled by the sugar plantation, their daily lives, labor wages, where they lived and where they shopped was really controlled by the sugar plantations. And so during that time period, they did have protests in terms of wage conditions and the working conditions that they were working under. And so the territory at the time, Hawaii was a territory, it wasn't a state. The government did start collecting names of people who led these union protests. And so from that, they really started developing a list of people, anticipating if the U.S. did go to war with Japan. They had this list from those days of really leaders in the community who they would have targeted. And so this is what allowed the FBI and the military to quickly execute that plan after December 7th, where they immediately knew who they were going to arrest and pick up. And so this map shows you the many, many confinement sites throughout the neighbor islands. Though Honouliuli is a national park, there were other confinement sites throughout the neighbor islands where people were immediately arrested and sent to either existing prisons with other criminals or places like cafeterias. And they had to kind of find housing for people as well. So it really ran the gamut of kind of the where. But understand that it wasn't just Honouliuli where people were arrested and jailed. It did occur throughout the whole island chain. And later on in September, as part of National Literacy Month, we are going to have, actually, she's on the call right now, Professor Kelly Nakamura actually is coming out later this year with a book through UH Press that actually does cover all confinement sites. And we'll be having a wonderful book author event in September at the shop, where she, along with another author, will be talking about her book. So that information is on our website, and you can learn more about it. We do have dates and times, and people are just welcome to show up as well for that book author event to learn more. So with that, they quickly then sent people from all the neighbor islands to the U.S. Immigration Station, which actually is still in existence today on Oahu. It's the U.S. Customs building. So folks can actually go there and know that that's where people were processed. In addition to that, though Honouliuli is known as the largest and longest used incarceration site in the state, it was actually primarily a prisoner of war camp. There were over 4,000 prisoners of war, primarily from places ethnically made up of Koreans and Okinawans. So these were people who were conscripted laborers during the war, forced to work for the Japanese army or enlist in the Japanese army. And so majority of them were Koreans and Okinawans, but there were also folks from the Taiwan, from the Philippines as well, and of course the Axis countries of Italy and Japan as well. So once people were processed through the immigration station, both POWs as well as those who were incarcerated U.S. civilians, they did create Sand Island Detention Camp here to house all those individuals. But because of Geneva Convention regulations that basically said you cannot have areas of imprisonment that were open to be attacked, a year later, that's how they came to create Honouliuli for that need. And it was also the growing number of POWs as well, that they really needed a more larger area to hold a majority of the POWs and the civilians that were incarcerated during this time period. So how did the military actually create Honouliuli? So going back to, again, a little bit of history, after the Great Mahele, where the native Hawaiian land ownership was changed into more Western private ownership, James Campbell actually purchased about 41,000 acres of ranch land in Honouliuli and really began the sugar plantation era. He actually found artesian wells in the area, and also the Waiahole Ditch brought water over from the Ko'ola Mountains on the windward side to the dry leeward side to be able to produce sugar plantation on the West Oahu side. And so this map is actually from a book called War in Waipahu, where it actually shows all the James Campbell lands that then were converted into army installations and military installations during World War II. And I want folks to pay attention to the shape of this right here, because you will see very clearly this is the exact same boundary of the park. It matches exactly the land ownership of James Campbell, and when the military actually did lease the land to make it into the incarceration camp, you will see on the next slide over that this shape and the boundary lines are exactly the same. So that's how the military got possession of the land to create the camp. And so it did open in 1943, March 2nd to be exact. Sand Island closed down in March 1st, and they did move folks over to Honouliuli in 1943. And the camp did close to the civilian side in 45 and the POW side in 46. So this shows some of the historic photos of what the camp looked like. And I will point out here that this aqueduct that was created during the Waiahole Ditch sugar plantation days is one of the features that still does remain at the park. And it played a very important story of how the park, the campsite, came to be rediscovered many, many years later. But I will point out here, folks, if you can notice the difference in the structures. So the aqueduct actually did divide kind of the POW side of the camp versus the U.S. civilian incarcerated side. And you'll notice that the structures are very, very different. The POW side had tents because, again, remember, the numbers were in the thousands. And POWs were meant to come and go, returned or exchanged with other prisoners. So this was a very fluid, transitory part of the camp, whereas the U.S. civilians were meant to stay indefinitely. And so you see that they had actual structures, unlike the POW side. They also had other facilities that the POWs did not have. The POWs only had cold water for showers. They had pit toilets. And so the U.S. civilian side did have hot water. They did have a medical dispensary. They also had a post office as well. So they had a little bit more infrastructure. But again, it was because they were meant to stay there indefinitely. So that's a little bit of difference between the POW side and the U.S. civilian side of Honouliuli camp. So here it shows you kind of what the camp looked like historically. As you saw from the historical photos, you saw some building structures, but there were actually over 175 actual structures, things from the housing that you saw. There were mess halls to feed the thousands of people that were there. The military had this camp area for their own housing, for their own offices. And so you can see each of the compounds were divided up into the POW side, as well as the civilian side and the army side. And within the POW side, which 7 also it held the Korean POWs, it was segregated out between the different countries. So there were, again, the Okinawan POWs are separated from the Korean POWs, as were the Japanese and the Italians. So each compound had different segregation. And even in the U.S. civilian side, though it was majority Japanese American, they also did have Italian Americans and German Americans that were held there as well. So even that was segregated out, and there were also women that were held at Honouliuli as well. And the other interesting aspect of the camp is the military that guarded all the POWs and the U.S. citizens were also segregated themselves. There were Japanese American soldiers, there were Korean American soldiers, and there were also African American soldiers. So that comes into play a little bit in terms of the different interactions between the groups during the camp history as well. And I'll talk a little bit about that. One of the things that's really neat is if you go to Hawaii's Plantation Village, they actually do have an exhibit on Honouliuli that's free, that's very interactive. I mean, one of the neat things is they have a historically accurate 3D model of the camp. So all of this was done by an architect with a grant from the Japanese American Confinement Sites Grant Program that is congressionally delegated and gets funding from Congress. But this really gives you a sense of kind of what the camp might have looked like in kind of a 3D image of the historic structures and the features and the elevation. So that if you have an opportunity, I would highly encourage folks to visit that. Again, they have a wonderful exhibit. It's very interactive. So this just shows you a little bit more of the historical photos, just to give you a sense of orientation. This was that aqueduct photo that I showed earlier with the POW side and the more U.S. civilian side of the camp. And just to share with folks who might not have been able to go there yet, what are the features that still remain? So unfortunately, after the camp was closed, the Army Corps did actually demolish everything. So there were actually no standing structures that were left, and I'll have a photo of that a bit later. But we do still have significant features of the camp that still remain. Some of this was predating the camp for the Waiahole ditch that I talked about. So the aqueduct is here and it's still there. We do have this dry rock wall, and it's a little bit hard to see in this photo, but there's another rock wall that's along this perimeter as well. This is the mess hall where family members were able to come and see their fathers, their brothers, their mothers, folks who were held at Honouliuli. This is actually the mess hall where family were allowed to visit weekly, once or twice a month initially, and I think later on it became an opportunity to be able to visit weekly as well. So that shows you a little bit of some of the historical photos, and you can see again, it's deep in a gulch in a valley. And the reason for that was, again, because it was a prisoner of war camp, high security, guarded by military, barbed wire. So it's really meant to be hidden and away and out of sight from view for those security reasons. So what was life like in camp? We do know that the POWs, as well as the U.S. citizens that were incarcerated here, were actually allowed to do some farming and grow vegetables. Unfortunately, they weren't actually allowed to keep the vegetables that they grew. This photo shows you kind of the U.S. civilian side of camp. People, just trying to pass the time as they were held here. So I think they were playing cards in this picture. I think there was also documentation that they also played Go and Mahjong as well. And so if you want to learn a little bit more of what life was like in camp, in November, we are dedicating that to the theme of life in camp. And so you will be able to hear more about some of how they spent their life. And we actually have the Honolulu Go Club talking about the role of Go, not just here in Honouliuli, but it played a role in other Japanese American confinement sites on the continent as well. So if you're interested in learning more about that, that'll be your opportunity in November. So who was actually held here? I shared a little bit that there were 4,000 POWs during the 3-year time period, and there was over 400 resident aliens and U.S. citizens held at Honouliuli, and the primarily majority of them were Japanese Americans, but I also shared that there were also Italian and German Americans. But beyond that, these were real people. These were people that had family, loved ones that were worried about them. And so I'm just going to share a few of the stories. And if you want to learn more, we do have more information for both the POWs and civilian side of the people that were held on our website. But this picture shows you some of the Korean POWs that were at Honouliuli. This photo shows you some of the Okinawan POWs. And we're still compiling more information about the POWs, and I'm glad that Kaori is on our call today because she's actually going to be one of our speakers in August to talk about the Okinawan POWs. So we are devoting both the month of July and August to learn more about experts who have been doing a lot of this research in terms of finding out more about the Korean POWs and the Okinawan POWs. So please, again, go to our website. We have all this information there, and we'll have like this talk registration links once we have specific dates and times set up for that. So I talked a little bit about the women, and there were a handful of women here at Honouliuli. Haruko Takahashi was actually a founder of the Konko mission, which still exists today. And so, as part of the 10th anniversary, they are going to provide special tours during this month and this commemorative year to talk more about her life. They'll have memorabilia and photos to share as well. But she was a Shinto priestess. A lot of the people that I talked about, the list of leaders in the community that the government kept, were folks like her, leaders in the community, priestesses of Shinto missions, Buddhist reverends and priests at Buddhist temples. We had folks, that had worked for the newspaper, school teachers. So she was one of those that was held at Honouliuli. I think the other person of note is the person on the bottom here on my screen is Sanji Abe. He was the first Japanese American elected to the Territory of Hawaii legislature. But more importantly, he was a World War I veteran. He had already served his country, proven his loyalty, but it didn't matter. He was put at Honouliuli as well. And we know for a fact that there were over 60 people at Honouliuli who had ties to military service. Either there were people like Sanji Abe, who had military, who was a veteran from World War I, or their brothers or their sons were then serving during World War II in the 442nd or the 100th Battalion or the military intelligence service. But it didn't matter. It didn't matter that these people were proving their loyalty, either past or present during that time. They were still incarcerated at Honouliuli and other Japanese American confinement sites. Some folks might recognize current Congresswoman Jill Takuda. Her great-grandfather was held at Honouliuli as well. Past Congresswoman Colleen Hanabusa, her grandfather was held at Honouliuli as well. So these were people, again, fathers, mothers, sisters, brothers, people who had family that were held, members of their community that were held at Honouliuli. I think for me personally, what's really has been really interesting in learning about the people who were held at Honouliuli are, I've been born and raised here in Hawaii myself, in Mo'iliili, and I did not know about this history until much later in life. But I think for me, what's been interesting about learning who these people were as individuals are the institutions that we all know and love today. For folks on Oahu who live here, I was really surprised to learn that a janitor at the Bishop Museum was held at Honouliuli. There was an art installer for the Honolulu Museum of Art, also held at Honouliuli. Hawaii United Okinawa Association, their precursor organization, their president was held at Honouliuli as well. So a lot of places that are familiar to us today, a lot of the Buddhist temples whose priests were taken to Honouliuli still exist today, like the Soto mission. Someone said they were joining from the Hongwanji. Their priest was also held at Honouliuli. So a lot of these institutions that we know of and might be in our lives today are folks that were held at Honouliuli as well. I think some of the most touching things that I've learned since starting in my position as superintendent are the crafts that were created by those incarcerated. I think to me, this is a little bit of hope in the darkness, and it really showed the resilience of the human spirit to find some joy and some hope during such difficult times of being imprisoned and not knowing when they were going to be released and when they can be returned to their families. So some of these beautiful artifacts that were created, they created bird pins. This ring was actually created with a handle from the handle of a toothbrush. They used shells that they found to create jewelry and beautiful works of art. And of course, folks sketched as well. And I think for me, the most touching part of all of this is that a lot of these artifacts were made to be given as gifts to their family members, to their children when they came to visit. Other things that were created were toys like trucks and airplanes, and these were given to their family members when they came to visit them at Honouliuli. They also did some. They were able to do some chores and get paid for it, a measly 10 cents an hour. And the other part about the life there at Honouliuli to share was that it definitely was, if folks have not been there yet, it's a very, very hot a place, very humid, very hot, full of mosquitoes. And so those that were held there did give it the nickname, the Japanese nickname of Jigokudani, which is Hell's Valley. So that's a little bit of kind of how they spent their time. And I think one of the things that also was neat about some of the sketch work that was done was also helping the archaeologists later who came to when the camp was relocated to really unearth some of these features that still remain, that they did use some of the artwork that was created by incarcerated to really confirm the location of places. This is Dan Nishikawa's sketch. Some of you who may remember George Ariyoshi, who was the governor back in the day, his wife, Mrs. Ariyoshi, Dan is her nephew. And so he sketched a portion of the camp that was the women's camp. And this wall actually remains today. And this sketch also by Dan Nishikawa points to this exact lamppost in the historical photos. And the archaeologists did actually use this to try to figure out where these structures were and where they should be excavating. And things like this mess hall in this historic photo, though the actual structure itself does not remain the area, which is actually a Honolulu Board of Water Supply well right now. We have structures that were can be shown in terms of actually where the location were, though again the structure does not remain. So we do have elements of the camp at the park today that still do remain and help us to kind of orientate of what life must have looked like and what the camp must have looked like back in 1943. I think the other excavation work and talks a little bit about how those incarcerated and held there tried to bring a little bit of normalcy to their lives and a little bit of beauty to their really hard life, is that we partnered with UH West Oahu and their archaeology students to do 3 years of archaeological work at the camp. And they did try to create, this beautiful garden area and decorative walkway, again, to just try to bring a little bit of normalcy to their life and a little bit of joy and beauty to their very harsh surroundings. So again, I shared a little bit of what the camp looked like in that previous photo, but you can see to the photo here, when I talked about how the Army did completely take everything down, you can see really what that looked like. And this aqueduct, again, from the Waiahole Ditch sugar plantation days, is one of the structures that does still remain. Some of this walkway here also remains as well. And you can see in this photo the dry rock wall that I've been pointing to and a little bit of the other wall here. Those are some of the structures that still remain. And we have things like the concrete slab foundations that were created for the mess halls, for the showers and latrines as well. So those are definitely original features to the camp that was created for the camp that we can help to continue to preserve the history of the camp. So what makes Honouliuli different? I talked a little bit about the folks that were arrested after December 7th. But what really makes that difference from what happened to the Japanese American confinement sites on the continent was I talked about certain people being picked up. They were leaders in the community. And that is a very different story of what happened to Japanese Americans in Hawaii versus the continent. It wasn't whole families being moved from as we learned in history of the West Coast Japanese American experience. The reason why in Hawaii that didn't happen was twofold. It was because at the time, almost 40% of the entire population of the territory of Hawaii was of Japanese ancestry. So from an economic perspective, it would have been really crippling to try to incarcerate almost 40% of the population. In addition to that, it just logistically would have been very, very challenging to do that as well. But I think what makes the story different in Hawaii too is if folks have read Tom Kaufman's book Inclusion, it talks about there was a lot of advocacy within the military about not doing that to the Japanese American population here because they knew who these people were. They were friends, they were neighbors, and they knew that there was no way these their friends and neighbors could be disloyal and were very loyal to the U.S. And so there was a lot of advocacy because people knew these fellow Japanese Americans within their own communities to not have a mass incarceration as what happened on the continent. So what that meant was only certain people were arrested and taken to Honouliuli. But what that also meant was it was a very sad story when they were either paroled or returned back to their communities. Because during the whole time period, because not everybody was having the same experience, folks that were selectively incarcerated faced their own level of ostracism and isolation because they were actually met with suspicion within their own community when they were returned. And it was sad. One of the descendants, Sandy Chang, she tells a story about her grandfather, Sandy Shimura, who his friends would only come to visit him at night. There were stories during the war period where wives and children did not share with others that their fathers were at Honouliuli because they themselves didn't want to be ostracized. Because at the time, um, you know, anybody under suspicion could be arrested and taken to a place like Honouliuli. So there's a lot of secrecy and a lot of shame, and that was very different again from the experience of Japanese Americans on the continent versus those here in Hawaii. I think the other difference, and Kelly Nakamura is actually our speaker for martial law in December, and that's the theme, is that unlike the mainland where they uh, were removed under Executive Order 9066. In Hawaii, it was actually under martial law that gave the military and the government that authority to arrest people. And that was a much more expansive authority and power that gave the military basically control over the entire territory and all U.S. civilians there. So everybody was under strict restrictions. You had to have special identification. You had blackouts. You had curfews. And that was true of all civilians. But it was specifically focused on Japanese Americans. And so, in essence, during martial law, our civil liberties that we know now as U.S. citizens were completely suspended. There were no lawyers assigned to those who were arrested. They weren't told why they were arrested. There was no evidence for their arrest. And so at the end of the day, court hearings were less than 5 minutes. And literally, if a neighbor said, "I think that person next door to me, might be disloyal," I mean, that's really all it took to be able to arrest somebody. So that's also a very, very different situation that happened here in Hawaii. That is very, very different from what happened on the continent for Japanese Americans. I think I talked a little bit about it being predominantly POW camp, and that it also include European Americans as well. I think a little bit of going back to what I started in some of the earlier slides is that really interesting interaction between the guards and POWs and those that were U.S. citizens that were incarcerated. This is a very unusual mix of people at this camp. Again, that's very different from the Japanese American confinement sites on the continent. I think what's really interesting about this too is that the guards often played this role of kind of interpreters between both the POW side and this U.S. civilian side. I think also the Japanese Americans also helped with some of the translation for the Japanese and Okinawan POWs as well. So I think the other really interesting thing about the POW side of the story is that they ironically were given more freedoms than the U.S. civilians, in that though under armed guard, they were allowed to leave the camp and do work projects outside of the camp. We just recently learned the park is funding the Center for Oral History at UH to do work on finding Korean POWs and interview descendants and try to get some oral history. But recently learned that the Korean POWs from Honouliuli, actually one of the projects was to work on sand replenishment on Waikiki Beach. So I do find it really interesting that they were allowed these kind of freedoms that U.S. citizens weren't, to leave and do work outside of the camp. But the interesting connection, and Kaori, our speaker for July for the Okinawan POWs, will show more, I'm sure. But because of the U.S. Or because of the plantation immigration history, that the Okinawan POWs actually did have family members in the local community at that time as well. So there was this interesting interaction between the Okinawan POWs with local people already living here in Hawaii because of that immigrant family or immigrant plantation history as well. So I think there's a lot of things that really make Honouliuli very different for what happened from the continent as well. That again, we have so many more speakers and a theme each month to learn about these different aspects of the camp, that I encourage you to look at our website and learn more about that. So yeah, I am now going to fast forward to 75 years later, after 1946, when the camp closed. What's been happening now with the camp? So you can see from these photos, it's very hard to imagine nature has taken over, how very thick and vegetated and jungle-like it is now. And that's why I have this photo here of kind of the historic photo overlaid into the Valley of the Gulch, because it's very hard to imagine that all that structure in the camp was actually there. And that goes to telling a little bit how the camp was relocated. So I had pointed out this dry wall for folks, and that's actually one of the historic features that allowed the Japanese Cultural Center volunteers to actually relocate the camp. So how did folks find this 75 decades later after it was closed? So the Japanese Cultural Center got a call from KHO and TV News because they were showing Schindler's List, which is a film about the Holocaust and what happened to the Jews during World War II. And the reporter asked the volunteer, Jane Kurohara, who took the phone call, where the camp was, where Honouliuli camp was in Hawaii. And they had no idea what he was talking about, and no idea where this camp was. And so that really started a 4-year-long research and search to try to relocate this camp. And so this drywall feature in the aqueduct I talked about earlier really played a pivotal role in trying to find and confirming that this indeed was Honouliuli internment camp, and that this, was where the camp was, referring back to this historical photos. So I'm going to hope this video works a little bit. I took this video just to give a sense of the valley and kind of what it looked like. It looks like now. So I hope that worked for folks. And then again, that's an overhead view of kind of a portion of the gulch for overlooking compounds 5 and 6 to give you a sense of kind of what that gulch looks like now. So once that was done, there really began a community-driven, grassroots, and partner-driven campaign to really recognize the historic significance of the camp and as part of American history, and how different and unique the experience was here in Hawaii versus the mainland. And so, really led by JCCH along with other partners in the community to establish the park. They had petitions and thousands of signatures. And on February 24th, 2015, 10 years ago, President Obama did establish Honouliuli as part of the National Park Service and a national park. One of the key partners in that was Bayer Hawaii. They are the ones that donated the original 123 acres of the camp to actually create the park. And we're actually currently in conversations with them, and they're donating an additional 22 acres as well to Honouliuli. So what has the park been doing since its establishment in 2015? I will note, however, our involvement with Honouliuli started back in 2006 when we did partner with JCCH to do the initial archaeological work to find information about the park. And at the time, it was a Park Service archaeologist that partnered with JCCH, and eventually they wrote the nomination for the Register of National Historic Places, which the park is on, and that information that they collected for that nomination did eventually lead to the park also being established by President Obama. So we've been involved actually since 2006, but official management of the park began when it was established in 2015. And so since then, we've done a lot of planning and inventory surveys to understand what we have to manage for. We now are a staff of 3. I started, there was only one dedicated staff person. My position is superintendent, but I'm so excited to share that we now have an archaeologist and a biotechnician. Certainly continuing the great partnership. We cannot do this alone with just a staff of 3. So we continue to partner with people to do the preservation work there. And then I'll talk a little bit about some of the other topics on this slide. So yeah, I think one of the important things is to share that it does take a long time to establish a new park. On average, it actually does take about 20 years for it to be fully established. And I talked a little bit about a lot of the initial work was planning, understanding the resources that we have to manage and shepherd on behalf of you all for conserving this important history. This document is on the park's website, and I'll put links to that in the chat at the end, but it's under our planning section. But this, if you want to know more about what we manage for and what we interpret for and what the purpose of the park is, this foundation document goes into all of that, and you can learn a little bit more about that. I talked about team members. So this is Gian. She is our wonderful biotech, but also does our outreach and education and leads our volunteer program. And John is our archaeologist for the park. And we also have a wonderful Kupu early professional intern for a year as well, Jasleen, who is joining the team to help carry forth the conservation, the preservation work of the park. So this shows a little bit of that aqueduct, how it looks right now. And I'll talk a little bit about some of the current projects and then close with kind of some other updates and open it up to Q&A. But this video shows a little bit of kind of what the park looks like today in that aqueduct feature. And so, yeah, we actually literally about a month ago wrapped this project up. So as you can imagine, this aqueduct dates back to the 1920s from the Waiahole Ditch. So it's a very historic structure. But like all things, you know, it was built at the time and through the years has some structural issues. One of the bases of the aqueduct had detached itself and fallen over. And the rebar that was in the actual aqueduct structure itself was starting to deteriorate and cause spalling, causing these pieces of the aqueduct to fall off. And so the park is really lucky to have what's called the Historic Preservation Training Center. They are the ones that are service the entire park. They are the ones that have the knowledge and the expertise to restore these historic structures. And they came to do exactly that. And you can see some of that work. So they really addressed the rebar issues, you know, replaced the cracked elements, put in cement to address some of the other cracking that was happening at the park. In addition, they also came to restore this rock wall, again, one of the historic features that I showed in the historical photos. But they literally took each rock and labeled it and numbered it to make sure that they put it back exactly as they found it. But improper water flow and a lot of sediment weight behind the rock wall was leading to these cracks and fissures and leading to it almost crumbling over. So that's another example of great work that they did. And a lot of what I do is just raising awareness and funding. I should have explained that the park is not open to the general public because we do not own any lands that connect us to a public roadway. But that does not mean that we don't have people and bring people to be educated about the park. It just has to be that I have landowners that are adjacent to me that I just need to get approval from to be able to access the park. And they're very both supportive. UH West Oahu is one side landowner, and Bayer Pharmaceuticals Hawaii is on the other. And they're both very supportive of the importance of bringing people here to educate them. So I'm very grateful to have their partnership. But yeah, we do bring students here. I bring my leadership to advocate for the funding internally that we need to continue to preserve and restore these important historic features. There's Gian. Also, we do go out to school groups and within the community to give presentation, have table events that we can bring awareness and education to our communities about the important history of the park. And then second to the last slide, but basically we're also embarking on our general management plan. So each park has a plan that really is the decision for how the park is managed. So it's a multi-year process, and we're just starting it off this year. And we will be going out to the community to get your feedback on what you want to see of how this park is managed. What are the public use and access and facilities going to look like? And what is it that we interpret around? We really want to focus on youth and schools. In terms of access, I'm really trying to work hard to be able to provide limited public tours again for the public. And so check our website and hoping that we'll be able to launch something later this year. John is starting a volunteer program as well, and we'll have information on the website for that. The park is also officially starting its museum collection to be able to accept artifacts and documents that people may want to donate to help us continue to interpret and preserve the history of this park. And I'm really excited to talk about Pacific Historic Parks. They are the education and outreach partner for the park. They are starting memberships and donation and fundraising opportunities. And we have over 55 partners joining us for our 10-year anniversary that we're really excited about as well. So we're really trying to work together for Honouliuli's future. And I end with this slide about why is this so important? So Henry Tanaka was a person incarcerated at Honouliuli who submitted testimony for a commission that was established to look into what happened to the Japanese Americans during World War II incarceration. And ultimately, the commission concluded that it was really wartime hysteria, a failure of political leadership, and really racism that led to the Japanese Americans being incarcerated. There was no evidence whatsoever at the time and afterwards that showed that they were disloyal. And eventually, the U.S. did apologize to the Japanese Americans, and they were given reparations. But I shared this because, Henry Tanaka shared that basically as part of his testimony that he did suffer material losses, but nothing, could have compared with the suffering caused by him being tainted with the suspicion of being disloyal to his country. No amount of apologies or reparations can ever replace the fact that, as he says, this has left an everlasting scar in my heart. This is something we can never give back to him. He talks about his benefactor during high school sending him away because she thought he was disloyal. And this is not something you can ever replace. You can never give back to somebody who lived through this experience. And I think for me, being Nisei myself, being born and raised here, it's people like me who would have been sent to Honouliuli. And I really feel that it's important that we continue to share these stories because it's important to honor the memory and make sure that what happened to them was not for nothing. So with that, I will pause and open it up for questions for folks who might have any questions for me. And just thank folks for your time this evening and letting me share this history with all of you.
Thank you, Christine. Really appreciate it. I got a question from Jill. I'm going to try to see if I can unmute her so she can ask it directly.
Okay.
Let's see. Hi, Jill. Jill Morgan. Yeah, you should be able to ask your question directly.
Okay.
Hi, thank you again for having this.
Yeah.
I learned so much from your talk, so thank you very much. But I was wondering, because I don't know really about national parks, so I was wondering,
Mhm.
Honouliuli, What is the significance of it being established as a national park? Is it in regards to protection from future builds onto the area so you can preserve the area, or is it funding based? I mean, can you tell me a little bit more why that's significant?
Yeah, well, I've had a lot of great conversations for people who were there from the very beginning. And what I learned from them is they just felt because of the national significance of what makes Honouliuli very special, there was a desire for it to be part of the National Park Service. I mean, that is our mission. The mission of the National Park Service is to conserve and protect these cultural and natural resources, and be able to share the story of the American experience. So I think, from their perspective, and I can personally share from mine, I mean, that is the mission of the National Park Service, is in perpetuity. We like to say we're in the forever business, but we are doing this on behalf of the American public to really share this history, and the continued progression of American history, with the American public. So I hope that helps to answer your question.
That does. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jill. And then also I got another question that was sent over to me, Christine.
Mhm.
Some people are curious about, are there any other events or presentations that we should be expecting in the near future regarding Honolulu?
Yeah, absolutely. So, as I shared, if you go to our website, nps.gov, /HONO, you will see on our homepage our 10th anniversary. And each month is dedicated from now until January to themes that you can learn about. And we have a virtual speaker for each and every month. I mentioned Kaudi and Kelly's on the line. Actually, Sharon, I just noticed that you've joined us as well. She's going to be our speaker in September. But each month is devoted to an aspect of learning about the park. So again, May is natural resources. June is learning about the Ahupua'a partners and more about the Native Hawaiian cultural aspects of the Ahupua'a. July is Okinawan POWs. August is Korean POWs. September is National Literacy Month. I talked about the book events there, and Sharon's going to be one of our authors and speakers, virtual speaker. And October is going to be recognizing National Farmers Day, because ag played a really big role predating the camp, and post too. It went back to agriculture, it went back to Oahu sugar plantation, and during the incarceration, farming was allowed. November, I talked about a day in the life. So we'll have folks talking about some of the artifacts. We'll have a descendant, Sandy Chang, will share what her grandfather made, and the artifacts she still has in her family from him. And then December, I talked about Kelly Nakamura is going to be talking about martial law, and I talked a little bit about that as well. So each month has special in-person activities and events. We have free film screens at the Doris Duke for local documentaries that were made about the Japanese American experience during World War II and incarceration. We have special tours, like I mentioned, the Konkon Mission Tour. We have other book author events this month as well for poetry. This month is Poetry Month, and so Hawaii's Plantation Village is hosting a poetry workshop at 2 p.m. this Saturday, where you will hear poems from those incarcerated at Honouliuli and poems written about Honouliuli, and that you get a chance to actually write your own poem, and that's being led by the State Poet Laureate, Brandy McDougall. She's leading that workshop. So yeah, I encourage folks to go ahead and check out our website to learn about all these opportunities to continue learning about the history at the camp.
Thank you, Christine. I haven't received any other questions, but I have allowed everyone to unmute in case they do have. If anyone else has any questions they'd like to, they can unmute themselves right now and ask directly. If not, we probably will be bidding everyone a wonderful Wednesday. Looks like we do have a Sharon who's just unmuted herself. Sharon, go right ahead.
Well, I was just wondering whether or not there ever will be direct access to the park from the public. You know what I mean? So that anybody could go and visit.
Yeah, so that's where I encourage you to get involved in our general management plan process. That's exactly the type of question we're trying to decide. What does public use and access look like? I shared a little bit with you the current constraints is that the park does not own any land that connects us to a public roadway. But that doesn't mean, again, we can't get people there. It's really important history, and we need to do that. It's just a matter of how and the frequency and what that access looks like. So I highly encourage you to get involved. We will be going out to the public, as I shared, with concepts and an eventual draft management plan. So again, that information it's on the planning section of the park's website. There's a flyer there that talks a little bit more about the GMP process and the timeline. And we encourage you to get involved and let us know how, if you want to be contacted about when we have public meetings or when we go out to the community. And I think Weston, I know we're a little bit over or nearing 6 o'clock, but I think I'm seeing, I don't know if it's directly to me, but any information about civilian Japanese immigrant families visiting the camp to provide food or other gifts to the incarcerated? Yes, they did. So there are wonderful kindness stories where the guard would look the other way to allow family members to kind of sneak food to their family. We were told that there was alcohol that was smuggled in as well. I actually talked to the son of one of the incarcerated women, and he talked about putting some alcohol in the flower vase that he gave her. And so, so there are definitely stories like that were shared as well. So I know we're right at 7, and I know Sharon, who's joining us from Washington, it's very, very late for you, and I know people might have dinner plans. So I want to just end with my thanks and gratitude for all of you giving of your time. And if you want to know how you can help Honouliuli, I would ask that you share this information. We have postcards that we can give people that have more information about the 10th. We have flyers on our website that people can print and put up in their local communities. We're trying to get it out far and wide about the history here and all the events. Restaurants have been great. I've been able to put things in Starbucks, public libraries, LL&L Hawaii, Hawaiian food, so think about where your community congregates, where conversations happen, your coffee, favorite place to get your coffee, and see if they're willing to put up a flyer. We do have an Instagram and Facebook account if you want to follow that. But yeah, just to help spread the word far and wide. It's really important to have this history conserved and bring awareness and education to people about what happened. So with that, I'll thank everybody for your time, and I really appreciate your interest, and hope to see you on some of these other calls or speaker series and in-person events. So mahalo, everybody, and have a good evening.
Thank you, Christine. Mahalo, and you all have a wonderful night.